Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Demystify Selling with Microsoft. And I'm excited for my guest today, Brian Galicia. And Brian is an author, speaker, a host of the ISV Success Live podcast, and a leader inside of Microsoft. So, Brian, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rob, for having me. It's a great honor to be part of your show. You've done a lot of great work in the Microsoft ecosystem and hosted a lot of my great colleagues on various topics. So I appreciate the opportunity.
No, I'm glad to have you here. And maybe just before we get started, you could share a bit about your background at Microsoft and some of the things that you've done.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. So I am very grateful and fortunate. I've been at Microsoft, it's hard to believe, 17 years. It'll be 18 in August. And I've had a numerous amount of great opportunity from global roles to what we call area roles and back and forth, back and forth. I am have the just great honor to lead a global team of people. So I take leadership very seriously. I have an amazing team, and what we do is we focus on dynamics and global ISVs, not just some of the top ISVs that we manage, but also recruiting some of the next best wave of biz apps ISVs to be part of our ecosystem. And to your point, very passionate about many different things. And one of them, of course, is what you're passionate about too, is LinkedIn and driving things at scale. And might have an opportunity to talk about this, but I actually co-authored a book about how, and of course it's for sellers, but of course partnerships. Oh, thanks for flashing that up. We drive a value proposition on how you do that scale, and you have to think about kind of a digital strategy to go do so. So I'm based here in the Seattle area. Have an amazing spouse with two amazing teenage daughters, and we also have a busy family because we also have two golden retrievers in our home. So if you hear them barking, hopefully there's not going to be an Amazon driver hitting because my office is right next to the front door of our house, and so hopefully Amazon driver doesn't drop off something to cause our
Yeah.
dogs to start barking.
Yeah, I have to say, I kind of feel like I know your family just through your newsletter. So, you put up great content each week, and the newsletter is one that I'm drawn to. I go through that thing each week because there's so much value in there. So, for those that haven't done it, if you aren't following Brian and his newsletter, that's something to do right away because he publishes some great content there. So, great. Well, thanks for sharing that, Brian. And to get started, you were very clear on your role is around ISVs. So maybe you could start by sharing what is an ISV to you? What do you view as an ISV, or what does Microsoft view as an ISV?
Yeah, no, thank you, Rob, for asking. So when you, because of course, hopefully everyone knows what the acronym means, but in case you don't, it's independent software vendor. And really, when you think about and you unpack that, it's really about, does a software company, doesn't matter who they are, does a software company want to partner in the Microsoft ecosystem to build what I refer to as repeatable IP, something
Mhm.
that you're going to package together in some form or fashion. And again, because my focus area is dynamics, something that you're going to do with dynamics, customer engagement, finance and operations, and or the Power Platform, have it go through the certification process to be listed on AppSource that shows with the tagging, because you'll know that it's a certified app because it actually has one of the dynamics badges tied to that IP. And you allow customer, whether it's free or something, and most of the time that's how you make money, you're charging that IP to then have that customer get that value. And I think that in the very simplest of definitions is what an ISV does. And the big value that ISVs can bring, you can imagine an ecosystem, Rob, is that Microsoft can't do anything, everything, or sorry, can't do everything, not anything,
Yeah.
can't do everything. There's no way that any software company on this planet can think about every single use case, whether it be a verticalized solution or horizontal solution, because it's so broad and vast on what customers and buyers expect. And so we have to provide an ecosystem where our partnerships, in this case, ISVs, can thrive because they are plugging a gap in an area that we just don't do, or they provide industry relevant IP to go into manufacturing, healthcare, financial services because of their expertise in that specific industry that then is configured end to end to then provide that value to a buyer. So hopefully that demystifies a little bit, because we also can have different partners. And we talked about this in the pre-show, Rob, where you could have an ISV who's also an SI, or an SI who's also an ISV, because you think about the partnership types at Microsoft. Granted, we do kind of categorize management and how we think about partners in certain lenses, but we have many different partners that actually do both. And there's value to actually having the capability to do both if an SI chooses to, because it can lead to opportunities where that repeatable IP can drive services. or the other way around, that services revenue can to lead to repeatable IP. And so there's different scenarios where someone would want to go do that, or a partner type would want to go do that in consideration for how they want to go to market.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how you explained the how an ISV brings value, whether that's through a business process or layering value on top of the platform. Because thinking of Dynamics, I mean, it's a massive platform on its own,
Mhm.
but it really is just that, a platform. And then when the companies can build on top of that, these ISV solutions can solve unique problems, whether they're industry focused or even if they're cross industry, but they're really detailed and they get that next layer of sort of relevance for D365. I think that's an amazing way to think about that.
Yeah, absolutely, Robin. I should have mentioned too, of course, anywhere you turn, especially if you watch the Super Bowl over the weekend, you might have noticed that Microsoft actually had an ad in the
Yeah.
Super Bowl. It was many years, I think it was maybe a decade ago, where we actually had an ad on Super Bowl weekend, or during actually Super Bowl. And you think about that opportunity, AI or Gen AI or whatever you like to call it. There's such a big opportunity for our ISV ecosystem, because there are places where an ISV can come plugged into an artificial intelligence scenario. Particularly around this term, you'll hear a term, it's not just Microsoft, but it's an industry relevant term. You'll hear the term Copilot, being able
Yeah.
to go into a Microsoft solution, in our case, a Microsoft solution, and actually have repeatable IP be part of that through a Copilot scenario, where it's not intended to replace that human. What it's
Mhm.
there for, and that's why it's deemed Copilot, it's there to help supplement the busy work or something that just takes a lot of time, to optimize that time of that person doing that work across many different use cases around sales, customer service, or whatever that use case may be. There's hundreds and hundreds of opportunities for our ISV ecosystem to think about it and get plugged into that Copilot Gen AI opportunity.
Yeah, I would argue it's endless, really. And you start to think about it, and you go into these industry specific solutions where, as an ISV, you bring something very unique to the specific industry, and the knowledge of how to automate that or how to augment the work process. I think there's just so many opportunities.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And we're just seeing it. I mean, we're just scratching the surface, because more and more, especially this calendar year, as we start, it's weird to say that we're already, I mean, not halfway through, but like already through a good portion of 2024, the
Right.
ability to have an opportunity to think about what those use cases are, and they'll continue to evolve, because there's probably things that we haven't even thought about yet, that
Yeah.
someone's going to be looking at that going, oh my gosh, this is going to solve an amazing use case to
Right.
allow people utilizing, in this case, business applications, to be more productive with the business outcomes they're trying to drive.
Yeah. No, I think we're just scratching the surface, like you said, of what we're going to see with AI and Copilot. So I'm very excited for that. So I'd love to change gears on a little bit, or change gears on you a little bit, and talk about something that I've heard you mention in the past, and it's the three areas of consideration for every ISV. You talk about these three areas, and I think that it was so impactful for me to hear that, and I really would love it if you could share those three areas with our audience today.
Yeah, happy to, Rob. And so I think about when you're an ISV and you're looking to be involved in the Microsoft ecosystem, there are three critical areas, and one is the obvious one. We'll get to co-sol. I'll save that to the end, because that's where a lot of ISVs want to spend
Spoiler
the
alert.
majority of their time. Yeah, spoiler alert. That's where every single ISV that I've ever spoken with, executives at every ISV, that's where they want to have the bulk of attention. How do we get
Yeah,
Microsoft sellers talking to my sellers and jointly selling something? So I'm going to say
yeah,
that for last, because that's one of the most ones that is always talked about. But the other two are just as important. And it's always that consideration set when I'm speaking with ISVs who are either managed or coming into our ecosystem. What are things they should be thinking about? So first and foremost, you think about what we call app source or marketplace.
yeah.
I know that they can be interchangeable, but in the Microsoft world, we actually have two distinct uh, marketplaces. One for our Azure business or Azure workloads, and then the other for Teams and, in my case, the business application space. And so, regardless, it's really important for ISVs to put a lot of thought process into the listing, because that is the first place that people are going to start to look. So you think about a buyer or even a Microsoft seller, when someone's trying to say, okay, I'm looking for this use case scenario to help solve a problem. I've made a decision, a business decision to purchase Microsoft, but I'm realizing, oh, They don't do this thing. So how do you plug that scenario or plug that potential gap? Well, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to go into a marketplace or an app source setting, and they're going to type in not necessarily a customer name, unless you're some software vendor that's very well known.
Yeah.
But in most cases, someone's going to type a use case scenario like configure price quote, contract lifecycle management, treasury. I'm just throwing out examples that exist where we've had success with ISVs and what will show up. And so it's really, really important for a partner, especially an ISV, to be thinking about how do you want that information to appear, and have you optimized it to say, okay, if someone in whoever is going to type in a search word, is your solution going to pop up? And or as they're doing the navigation, not just they're going to do a maybe a keyword search, they might start to navigate and say, okay, I'm in the financial services industry. I'm looking for a dynamic solution that works with dynamic sales. What shows up? And most of the time, the ISVs have done that work with taxonomy, but sometimes I do find that ISV just checked everything or maybe forgot to tag something. And that's a missed opportunity, because you never know how a buyer is going to evaluate a scenario. And you want to cover all the bases to ensure that the solution is showing up in a certain way. And then finally, a step that sometimes ISVs miss is that when you do list your solution, how is the leads that are going to come from that listing going to flow into your own CRM tool?
Right.
Sometimes I find that the ISVs forget that step and realize, oh my gosh, I forgot to connect my AppSource listing to my CRM tool. And again, it doesn't have to be Dynamics. I hope it is. But if it's not, it connects to other stuff. But you have to take that step to ensure that the plumbing, or how a lot of my colleagues like to do, you have to flow water through the pipes. Like you have the listing up there.
Such a great point.
Yeah. So let me pause, and that's the point I wanted to have on number one, which is app source marketplace and thinking about the end to end. So let me pause before I get to number two. Let me pause, Rob, to see if there's any feedback on your end.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions and kind of things that came to mind for me is you talked about keywords and making sure you have all those keywords there. You know, do you think that really focuses around the business problems, like people are trying to solve, is be clear on what business problems you're trying to solve in your copy or in your marketplace listing?
Absolutely. You want to think about the business problems or the business outcomes. What is some of the things that you think about if you were to talk with a buyer and they go, okay, I'm making the business decision because this does this thing. Sometimes there's a whole bunch of feature sets that ISVs tend to do, which is totally fine. But part of it is you have to be thinking about, if someone was to do just a search on a business problem they're trying to solve, are you optimized to pop up if that use case is going to appear? Such as, hey, I'm trying to improve revenue. That's a very broad statement. But you think about it, well, how do you improve revenue? Well, it could be a whole bunch of things. It could be configure price quote. Could you be contract lifecycle management? And of course, you want to cover off on those keywords, but you also want to cover off on, hey, someone is just trying to improve revenue. It's a very simple example, but so powerful, because that in itself, you want to optimize that conversation so that if your solution does improve revenue, okay, great. Then it's going to go into the details that someone might be thinking about that opens up to other things. Okay,
I love that. And then the other point you made there about navigation and making sure that, I've seen the same thing where ISVs just check all the boxes. We do it all. And I think that it's so important, and I'd love your take on this, is that you understand where you fit, you understand where your superpower lies, and be sure that you sort of organize or check the right boxes to highlight that.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. Because sometimes people go, well, I want to show up everywhere.
Yeah,
it can be dangerous, because unless you're some big software company that does a lot of stuff like we do with Microsoft, you want to be very narrowly focused to be your sweet spot. Because I always talk to ISVs, and some of our horizontal ISVs that have a solution that covers multiple industries. That's great, but you do want to check the box for the industries that you primarily focus on, because most of the time when I have conversations with ISVs, they have 2 to 3 industries that they're really good at. So if that's the case, then don't try to check all the boxes. Just check a few that then really drives and hones in that conversation, because then you're focusing your time and attention on the sweet spot of where you can be defined. And exactly your point, Rob, whether it be the industry taxonomy, the IP that you're aligned to, and or what I also see is that someone says, oh, we're available everywhere. And that might be the case, but if not, let's say you are a US based partner, but you
Yeah.
have aspirations to go into the UK. It's okay for you to check that box as long as you have the ability to have a route to market that offers value. Because if all of a sudden you're trying to build it from scratch and someone tries to reach out and you don't have, let's say, local support, there's no pipeline, and you don't even have it localized in that language, really hard to all of a
Yeah.
sudden you're being serviced up in a way that is misrepresented to what you can actually do. And so you're better off just saying, hey, you know what? I'm a US ISV and I only focus on the US market. That's
Right.
totally
I
fine
mean,
because you're
yeah,
staying in your
absolutely.
lane to be able to drive that value. So you're not trying to be all things to everybody and then dilute your message into areas that you're not good at, or maybe you're not ready to go out and say that you support Germany because you don't have the you don't have your IP localized to German. And if someone express interest in the opportunity or a conversation in Germany, you wouldn't even have a resource that could speak German to have that conversation go back and forth. And those are the things I sometimes see that partners aren't thinking about when they're trying to expand into global areas.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, let's move on to number two. I know we've got a lot to cover here, so let's move
Yeah.
on to number two and talk about that.
Yeah, sounds good. So the second one is what I call P2P. And so if
Mhm.
that acronym doesn't ring a bell, it's really what I refer to as partner to partner. And
Yeah.
that's such a huge opportunity because you can look at the Microsoft ecosystem. We have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of different partner types. And I mentioned a little bit, I mean, sometimes where the partner to partner scenarios really thrive is either an ISV working with another ISV because the ISV IP complement each other. But
Yeah.
even more so, where I see a lot of success occur is you have very specific ISVs working with software integrators, when I call
Yeah.
SIs, either at a global or area level, because in the Dynamics world, and again, I can't speak to some of the other workloads, but I have to suspect that within Microsoft, it's very similar. We actually don't do a lot of implementations ourselves, meaning we don't have Microsoft consulting services leading the charge in deploying Dynamics. Sometimes we do, but it's not very often. We scale
Right.
through partners, and that's always been the case for Microsoft since the almost day one, which
Yeah.
is we want our partner ecosystem to thrive. And so when a deployment for customer engagement or finance and operations or power platform occurs, that's being driven by a software integrator that has the expertise, that has the designations, that has the training, that has the certifications, that the experience to go do that. And so when an SI is going to do that work and they uncover, oh, we need this specific use case scenario. Of course, some SIs will try to go build it on their own, but
Yeah.
most of them won't do that because they don't want to then realize that, oh my gosh, I'm now repeating something that I
Right.
have to support, versus finding a ISV that already has a repeatable IP. They build that partner to partner engagement so that there's a business value to bring in that partner because they excel in that specific use case scenario. And that SI, their value proposition is not only can they take that IP, but they can make a services revenue opportunity on it because it's a service
Right.
opportunity for them to deploy that repeatable IP into the customer base that they have.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that's a vision that Microsoft sees equally as well in the concept of the multi-party private offers and
Mm,
starting to
yes.
go down that path where Microsoft recognizes there is a tremendous value when you marry that SI ISV community together that, to your point, I mean, it drives revenue for both parties and it drives the outcome for the customer. When you bring the two pieces together, the customer wins ultimately, I think. So.
Yeah, no, and you're spot on, Rob. I mean, I think all the innovation that we will continue to do with our marketplace and transactability and offering these valuable scenarios and use cases for all these different permutations of how a buyer is going to transact something
Yeah.
with Microsoft through different partner types, SI and or ISVs, is going to be something to continue to watch because we'll continue to innovate on those capabilities to make it easy. So there is value to a buyer, but also value to the Microsoft ecosystem and to the end customer because all these things have to be aligned. It can't just be value to one different type of scenario. It has to
Yeah.
be value across why would a customer do it? Why would a partner do it? And why would a Microsoft seller do it? Which is a good segue into a final one because I know we're going to run out of time. But the final
Perfect.
one is Microsoft co-sell. And so you think about it, would one say one's more important than the other across the other two I mentioned? I would say no. You should, like, every partner should be thinking about all three in some form or fashion. I know everyone wants to drive to Microsoft co-sell, but one of the things that you and I talked about kind of in the pre-show, Rob, which is you have to build relationships.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, just being part of the Microsoft ecosystem, I wish there could be a silver platter that all of a sudden unlocks thousands and thousands of leads that are automatically going to be assigned to you from Microsoft
right.
sellers. But if we're all being honest and looking and self-reflecting, that's not going to necessarily happen because they don't. You have to build. It's like with selling. You have to build the relationships so people know about you. They know about the value proposition. They know why they should bring you in certain use cases because they've gotten to know you. And so I think that's the biggest thing when it goes into how does someone get started. One, you have to take the time. What's your strategy to get in front of the right Microsoft sellers? And when I say Microsoft sellers, that's where it's important to understand the use cases. And we'll probably spend another 20 minutes just talking about that. And I know you've had
Right.
conversations with different people, Rob, but I put it very simply. You have to understand what Microsoft seller is going to help sell your solution to what Microsoft refers to as rooms of the house. If I'm
Yeah.
going to sell to IT, okay, who are Microsoft selling to IT that use case? If I'm going to sell to the chief revenue officer, who on the business side is going to sell to that use case for those scenarios? And for those of you who are new to the Microsoft ecosystem, there are more than one different types of Microsoft sellers that do that. And
Yeah.
it's important to know that because depending on who you want to have sell with you, that seller is motivated by certain things. One seller could be motivated by Microsoft or what we call Azure Consume Revenue, ACR, and another seller can be motivated by Dynamics Revenue. And
Yeah.
sometimes they're very unique. And so if you're trying to sell your value and it doesn't, let's say, impact Dynamics Revenue, guess who's not going to potentially be leaning in to help co-sell with you? The
Right.
Dynamics seller. And so, and I'm only speaking that from real life experience because you have a ton of Azure partners trying to say, "Oh, I'm trying to sell to the chief revenue officer. I want the Dynamics seller to sell with me." That's
Yeah.
great, but if your solution does not help that Dynamics seller sell new Dynamics revenue or licenses,
Yeah.
there's less of an opportunity for that Dynamics revenue to Dynamics seller to lean in. And you hopefully understand that because how are sellers compensated? Because I used to be a seller and a sales leader myself, coin operated. They're going to be motivated by where they can retire the most quota. I know that's a weird thing to say, but ultimately that's how they get motivated to have the right conversations with the right buyers. And don't get me wrong, there are Microsoft sellers that can help you with that conversation. You just have to be very focused, kind of what we talked about at the very beginning through the 3 steps. You have to just know your value proposition and know how those people are going to work with you and how they get paid. That allows them to really understand how they can jointly work with you to then drive that co-sell to the end buyer.
Yeah, that's so important. I think you nail it when you talk about the alignment and making sure that you're aligned with the right people inside of Microsoft, because if you're not, the co-sell motion will be very difficult. So, and
Yeah, 100%.
I would also argue that before you go down the path of co-sell, that you should be absolutely certain you're set up perfectly or as best you can in the first alignment in the marketplace. Then you're leveraging the peer-to-peer or partner-to-partner, because those all can facilitate introductions to the right people inside of Microsoft, the right sellers. So I think that having one and two is just as important, if not more important, than starting with co-sell. And that can be a challenge, and it's a big undertaking, but I think it's really important. So I love that you shared those with us, Brian. That brought so much clarity for me personally. So thank you, and
Yeah,
I'm
my
sure
pleasure.
good for our audience. So
Yeah, my
great.
pleasure,
Well,
Rob.
as we're wrapping up here, Brian, a couple of things is if someone's to take away just one thing from our conversation today, what would you like that to be? What's the one thing that if they were to just remember that, that would be the thing you'd want?
Gosh, I would just say, well, first off, grateful for anyone listening to this conversation to learn more. I think it's just an opportunity to be curious and to evaluate whether or not a partnership with Microsoft makes sense. And then when you do that, then it's those considerations we talked about, which is where do you want to drive the conversation? What type of partnership do you want to be considered? And if you're an SI, and you have repeatable IP, how do you get that into the marketplace to help drive it? And then to the 3 things we talked about, which is, okay, if you're going to go into an ISV lens and how you're going to work with Microsoft, the 3 things we talked about, which is app source marketplace, partner to partner, and Microsoft co-sell, all going hand in hand. And to your point, the co-sell piece can be fed into the great work that you might be doing with partner to partner and app source marketplace, because that feeds into the co-sell conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And before I get to my last question, is I'd love to invite you back and talk about that co-sell in a little more depth, but through the lens of your book, because I think that the stuff that you point out and the tactics and the strategies you point out in your book are tactics and strategies that people can employ, or ISVs as well as SIs can employ to work tighter or closer with Microsoft. So if you're open to that, I'd love to have that discussion with you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Rob, and thank you so much, because it was a bucket list item to write a book, and I co-author it with someone named Melanie, and it's right here.
Oh,
So
there we go.
anyone who wants to potentially just do a quick perusal, it's on Amazon. You can either get a digital copy or get a physical if you actually, like me, if you actually want a physical hard copy.
Yeah.
I definitely encourage it, and it would be a great conversation starter. Maybe in the next one, Rob, where we can dive deep, and because it was written for sellers. However, is part in the partnership world, guess what we do? We sell. It's the same
Right.
thing. And
All
so
day, every
how do
day.
we leverage those same principles that are written in the book and putting a lens on the partnerships type or the partnerships, because it's very similar in the approach that you take on the digital strategy, how you show up, what's your profile look like, what's your content strategy. All those things come to play to drive the conversations that are ongoing, because we can't always meet people face to face, but we can drive that conversation initially digitally, and having that strategy in place is critical.
Perfect. Well, I'll look forward to that. And then finally, is if anybody wants to learn more about Brian, where do they go?
Oh, thank you for asking. I think the biggest thing is if you just go into LinkedIn, you just type in my name, or just www.linkedin.com/in/Brian Galicia. Takes you directly to my profile. And as Rob mentioned, highly encourage you, either connect with me. Hey, say you watched the show with Rob, hopefully you got value out of it. Follow me, and or subscribe to Rob. As Rob mentioned, I do have a newsletter. Thank goodness it's Friday. You'll see it on my profile. That is the best way to kind of stay up to date on all things Microsoft related. And also from a relationship standpoint, you get to know me, to what Rob said, get to know me as a human, as a person. And that's how we can drive the professional relationship moving forward.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Brian. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I'll look forward to our next one.
Sounds good. Thanks again.